Welcome to another exciting episode of Unraveling Intellectual Property with Michael Stein. Today, I am very pleased to have Brian Peretti, a good friend, law school buddy, and he is now the CEO and founder of Everstream Advisors, which he will tell you a little bit more about. And after a 22-year career, he is retired from the U.S. Treasury as the Chief Technology Officer and the Deputy Chief AI Officer. Oof, that sounds a lot. Brian, thank you for being on the podcast.
Mike, thanks for inviting me. Long-time listener, first-time participant. So really excited to kind of dive into the conversation here. Always find your conversations and interviews really interesting, and I always learn something. So hopefully I'll learn something today too.
Well, I mean, today I'm kind of excited because normally I have well, you are an attorney, but attorneys in either private practice or from the business side, but we're going to hit you from the government side here. But why don't you do a little introduction? What is Everstream Advisors? What do you do now? And a little bit of what you did with the U.S. government.
So within the U.S. government, I started right after 9/11. I was in the Office of Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection, directing that office for many years, in which we really looked at back office operations. We handled a lot of incidents, both physical and cyber, to try to figure out how to be able to make the financial system more resilient and redundant so that in the event of any kind of physical or cyber disruption, we can continue to deliver services across the entire financial services spectrum. After a while, I took a detail over to DHS during COVID and worked with them on many different issues related to economic disruptions to be able to help us ease some of the pain that was going through that time, as everybody remembers. About 2 years ago or so, there was an executive order that came out under the Biden administration to say we need to focus more on AI. I was then given the title of the Deputy Chief AI Officer, and we created a report on how AI is being used in the financial services sector. From that, I was then asked to serve as the Chief Technology Officer for Treasury while continuing to work on the Deputy Chief AI Officer portfolio. So really trying to figure out how we build a future Treasury to be able to continue to deliver services to anyone in a way which is going to be most efficient as these things continue to evolve. One of my big goals there is really creating the governance structure to be able to figure out how we can coordinate across all of Treasury, so 100 plus 1,000 employees, as we deployed AI across those networks. And that was really an interesting challenge to figure out how to be able to deliver it in a safe and secure manner while being able to use the technology in the most efficient way possible to be able to make sure we're at the cutting edge to a large extent. So in Everstream Advisors, when I left and retired in September, is really a full service consulting firm to be able to help firms really understand what their posture is related to risk management, emerging technologies, operational resilience, operational risk, and then work with them to be able to help get them to world's first-class organizations. So, as we continue down this path, really kind of understanding how we get to a better place. So that's really my background in a nutshell, and really excited to be here today.
All right, well, thank you. Let's get into this infrastructure component because people, or at least me, I hear Department of Treasury. I think you're just handling money and fiscal policy and what the interest rates are,
Yeah.
but what is infrastructure and how does it impact? Because a lot of my listeners are private practice. They have their own businesses. Uh, how what does the Department of Treasury do with respect to infrastructure, and how does that impact private practice?
Sure. Back in 1998, leading up to Y2K, there was an identification of key infrastructures that had to work within the United States to be able to make the entire economy work. One of those identified was financial services. So before I started Treasury, there was a whole effort leading up to Y2K to be able to make sure financial services could still work in connection with infrastructure they relied on, telecom, power, human capital, things like that. After Y2K, that kind of died out for a while until 9/11 came around. And then what happened on that day was it really was identified that the main Treasury didn't understand back office operations. And by back office operations, I mean how the things actually move back and forth.
When
So
you
if
say,
you
I'm
say,
sorry, the back
sure.
office, of
Sure.
companies, the government?
Yeah. So across everything. So if we think about if we watch, say, CNBC, right? You see a ticker symbol, you see stocks being traded,
Right.
but nobody knows how they get traded. What's the guts behind that, right? How do we make sure that those trades can occur, that they are safe and secure? So if you put in a bid for a certain price, it'll come out the other end the same way you put it in, and it couldn't be changed as it moved through the system. So that infrastructure became a key focus of how we kind of worked on these issues and really work with other sectors to make sure there was resilience. So when you pick up your phone, if you still have a landline phone, which most people don't have, you have a dial tone, right? No matter what happens. If you flick on a light switch, you always have power, right? Those kind of critical things were stuff that we were working on to be able to make sure they continue on in the best way
So
possible.
even Treasury gets involved in keeping my lights on?
So we try to work with the other sectors to be able to make sure that they have their lights on, right? And
Okay.
so the key is that financial services is not necessarily a real time thing, right? So we take 2 days off every week, right? Friday and Saturday and Sunday. We close the markets at 4. There's some post trading, opens at 9:30. But if you think about power, that has to work 24/7. You think about telecom, has to work 24/7. And there are a lot of those issues that we have to focus on. So just think about stuff like undersea cables, right? If you want to call up Europe, you can go through satellites, which are much don't have the same bandwidth, but you can go undersea cables to be able to make sure you can transmit that information. How do we at Treasury, we were able to make sure that those systems worked? We understood what the resilience was, and we had a whole exercise program to test the efforts out there to be able to make sure that what uh, people were saying, in your contracts actually could occur. So we had a lot of different exercises and a lot of conversations to be able to make sure that we were able to understand how those things worked. And that was a big partnership between us, Department of Energy, transportation, FCC, other departments within government to really understand what was going on. Now, we always know sometimes there's going to be a failure, right? Sometimes somebody hits a telephone pole and it goes down. How do we think about backup systems, right? How do we make sure those things still run, backup generators and the like? And that becomes really critical because if these things go down, there's a lot of people who aren't happy. Now, if we look at the ranking, right, financial services way below hospitals, right? They always have
So
to work.
ranking with,
If we just think about what's most critical
oh, okay,
for
most
for
critical.
the for
Okay,
the country to
ranking. All
work,
right.
right?
Yeah.
You probably put hospitals close to the top. You focus on stuff like telecom, energy. Those are called lifeline sectors that we look to say, hey, these are most critical. And then we look down the list, right? So financial services is important, but nobody dies in the event a payment isn't made, right? So how do we kind of work through to understand our limitations, but also work to increase the resilience? So hopefully at the end of the day, these things work in the most optimal way possible.
Well, I heard you working with government agencies, and I mean, we've spoken over in the past about you meeting with private sector people. What's your interaction with private sector? How do you get involved? Are you just calling them in and saying, "Hey, give me information"? Do they come to see you? What's the relationship there to make all these systems work?
Yeah, so one of the things we found out on 9/11 was that there were not clear communication pathways between government and the financial sector tied to operational risk. You heard many other times with regulation, that's out there all over the place. But how do we talk about whether or not back office systems are working the right way? And so what we do is we created two different groups, one called the FIBIC, the Financial and Banking Information Infrastructure Committee, which is only government, and a private sector organization called the FISIC, the Financial Services Sector Coordinating Council. And those are private sector folks. Those are all high level financial services executives, your CIOs, chief information officers, your chief information security officers, your chief security officers. And then we were able to talk about, how they look at resilience, how they look at redundancy. Where are the places where government may be able to assist to be able to make those systems more secure? Where are the places where we should stay out because it's working really well? Where's the places where it might be helpful for us to put some pressure on some organizations to help them be more responsive to be able to address some of these challenges? And one of the things we did over time was
But
we
Brian, just
also, yeah,
briefly,
yeah, sure, sure.
does any private company say you need to be tougher on me?
So there are certain companies that are critical utilities, financial market utilities, that need to be up 100% of the time. Was it that we had to be tough on them? No, what a couple times we did have to be tough on them. There are a
Okay.
couple interesting stories out there in which their resiliency measures were nowhere near the level it should be. So, for example, your primary data center should not be on your first floor, and your backup center data center should not be on the fifth floor of the same building, right? That doesn't make any sense, right? You should have some geographic dispersity between the two. And so at times we had to say, really, is this the way you think is most optimal? And while we couldn't tell them to change it, it was pretty clear that those did not make sense. Pre 9/11 probably did, post 9/11 not so much. So then we work with them to say, how do we find, co-location centers or other places to be able to build the right areas? Sometimes they were looking to build things and they need some information from us on what the threats were and vulnerabilities in certain geographic areas, right? Do I want to build a data center in a foreign country that may not have a stable government, right? Probably not, but they need some better information to be able to figure out where those optimal places are. So as we work through some of these issues, right, it was really helpful for us to be able to work with them so that they can identify hard problems to do it. Many of the problems were not within the sector, right? There were telecom issues, there were energy issues, other kind of issues that were going on. But we had to be able to work and understand what was their top priorities and work to address that because that's what they were running within their firms. It wasn't our job to tell them what should be their highest priorities unless we had information that there was a specific potential issue. So, for example, when Russia continued their invasion of Ukraine, right, we alerted them to the fact that, hey, Russia may be targeting U.S. companies and otherwise, and you should be thinking about that. And so we did a big effort on that, right? We actually
I mean,
published the battle plans.
can I assume it's not just banks? We're talking about all kinds of companies?
Well, I was only responsible for financial services sector.
Okay. All right. All right.
So for me, it was banks, insurance companies, depositories, securities firms, those kind of things in the financial services sector.
Right. But I would
Other
imagine a
sectors,
lot of these issues are relevant to, I mean, every company wants to be up and running, especially, bigger companies 24/7.
yeah. So if you're in the telecom sector, right, the FCC would be talking to you. If you're in the energy sector, Department of Energy would be talking to you. We would also be talking across to each other, right? What issues are you seeing, right? What kind of cyber vulnerabilities are hurting your systems that may be important for us? So how do we be able to understand that? The other big thing was how do we make sure that in the event that there was a potential outage, that information was coming over as quickly as possible, right? If there's a energy outage somewhere, it's good to know, hey, your backup area may have issues, is a way for us to reroute traffic and the like.
Yeah,
So
there was
for
an
us,
interesting TV show fairly recently with Robert De Niro. I don't know if you saw it, but it was like about how someone got into the internet infrastructure and could shut down all communications and the like. And
yeah, there's currently a vulnerability out there that you may have heard of. I believe it's called Salt Typhoon, in which it's pretty clear that there's a foreign nation who's inside of our telecom system. And the question is, are they going to potentially flip a switch and shut things down, right? How do we think about that? If that's the case, how do you then reroute your traffic or think about other methods to be able to do that? Because the primary system may not be as robust as we could be thinking. So that's one of the things, we have to continue to have that public-private dialogue, to understand what are your biggest risks. We can think in government a lot of trying to figure out what we believe may be most critical risk, but I'm not running your system. And I never pretended to run your system. You were in charge of that. When I became the chief technology officer and the deputy chief AI officer, then I was running a system. And my risk calculus was much different. And I was unable to articulate that. This is
all right,
what
well,
we need to have working. Yeah.
let's wrap up part one of two-part. I'm
Sure.
going to have you back. What I
Yeah.
would like to get into is your role with AI and the future of quantum. And uh, thank you for this episode. And to all of my viewers out there, thank you for tuning in. As I said, we're going to have Brian back. Till next time.